So to get us going, what I'd like to do is ask everybody who's on the phone, if you've had a chance to do the self-scan, if you could just in the chat, if you haven't already, enter in which disposition came up for you after the self-scan. And if you haven't had a chance to do the self-scan, that's okay. You can just take a look at these 4 badges that are on the page. And if there's one that you think best describes how you're feeling in this moment, go ahead and just pop that in the chat, just so we get a sense of the spread and where people are currently right now on this call. And while you're doing that, I'll go ahead and introduce myself and Karrikins Group. My name is Julie Williamson, and I'm the Chief Growth Enabler for Karrikins Group. I'm joined by my colleagues, Kate Huckabay and Erica France. You'll see Kate on video, and Erica's not on video, but she's in the background helping to man the chat. I actually can't see the chat, just to let you know. So Kate and Erica will be letting me know if questions or other things come up that I need to be aware of as we go through the webinar. At Karrikins Group, we had the great opportunity to work with companies as they do the hard work of moving from agreement to alignment and delivering on their strategies in ways that transform their companies, their markets, and their industries. We love doing the work that we do, which is a great privilege. And one of the things that we've noticed over the years is that while it's critically important to have clarity on what you are doing, that's your strategy and your direction forward, and we love doing that work, how you do it, which is where alignment happens, is equally important. And how you do it together as a leadership team really matters. And we've identified 4 different dispositions that reflect the energy that we see leaders bring into the process of alignment that really impact their organization's ability to move quickly and to transform their organizations and their markets. This 4 disposition model is just helpful for us to help leaders really understand how they're showing up and what they might be spreading through their organization. It's one part of understanding how you align to a particular strategy and how you deliver in your organization. We wanted to share that because it's really important in times of challenge, and we all have a macroeconomic challenge at the moment. It's really important in times of challenge to understand how you might be showing up as a leader and how you're leaning into spreading the right energy through your organization. So what I'd like to do in this coffee break is just take you through the model, give you some ideas about how these different dispositions show up and impact organizations, and then give you some tools and tricks for how you can spread more effectively your own leadership energy in your organization. It looks like we've got a lot of people who are feeling optimistic, and that's awesome. A couple of people who are feeling skeptical, and that's a really powerful disposition actually for, especially in times of challenge, kind of wrapping your arms around what's going on. And some people who are more in that inventive space, really looking at how we might ideate out of this. So these are all great dispositions to understand and to unpack. And I would just point out that we all cycle through all of these dispositions every day, every hour, sometimes every minute. What I'm encouraging people to do always is to be intentional about the energy that they're bringing in to any particular situation so that they can spread the right energy to the rest of the organization. So what I'd like to do right now is just give you a quick walkthrough of the 4 dispositions, and then we're going to take a look at how they spread organizationally. The first one, oh, sorry, Kate, let's go ahead and clear those annotations. And the first one is the inventive disposition. Now, the inventive disposition is a really wonderful headspace and energy to bring in, especially when you're in those blue sky sessions, ideation sessions, when you're thinking about what comes next. How are we going to create and innovate our products, our markets, our customers, whatever it might be. One of the challenges with the with the inventive disposition is that it can be sometimes in times of challenge a little bit chaotic, because people in this disposition are great at failing fast and moving quickly, and they tend to go out on their own a little bit more, try and explore those new horizons. And if people are looking for some degree of stability in terms of direction, it can inject sometimes an unnecessary level of anxiety in the organization. So it's just a watch out if you're in that disposition to do that check to say, am I bringing other people along? And am I injecting the right energy around not just positive motion forward, but also a degree of stability? The second disposition that we see leaders show up with, sometimes it quite honestly is a discouraged disposition, feeling overwhelmed, a little anxious, really kind of maybe exhausted with the whole situation. Whether you're in a growth cycle or in a time of challenge, just the discouraged disposition can pop up for anyone at any time. One of the things to know about the discouraged disposition is it's incredibly contagious. It spreads very, very quickly. We'll talk a little bit about that, but there's a whole body of work around how anxiety and fear and distress can spread very quickly through organizations. So as a leader, it's important to be really attentive to where you are. And if you are feeling this disposition, to understand the impact that it can have more broadly and how you might need to course correct around that. The third disposition is the skeptic disposition. And again, as I said earlier, this can be a really powerful disposition. It brings a degree of pragmatism into decision making together with being a little risk adverse, kind of sitting in that space of, I'm going to ask a lot of questions. I'm going to try and really understand. I'm going to try and dial this down. I'm going to try and protect what we have. We're going to try and make sure that we take measured steps as we move forward. And that skeptic disposition is actually a really powerful place for business as usual and in times of growth as well as in times of challenge. But it does sometimes create some delays in terms of moving quickly or taking advantage of opportunities. So just again, something to be aware of if you're sitting in that disposition. One of the things about the skeptical disposition, because of that pragmatism, is it doesn't spread quite as easily. So that if you're in that risk adverse space, the discouraged disposition sometimes can be a little louder. We'll talk more about that in a minute. And the fourth disposition that I want to introduce is the optimistic disposition. This is an incredibly powerful disposition and energy to bring into your leadership as you're working to align and deliver on strategy or recover from a challenge. And this optimistic disposition sits you in the space between pragmatic and forward focused. So being able to really look to the future, but while also being incredibly practical about the challenges that lie ahead. One of the real challenges with the optimistic disposition is that it doesn't spread very easily. You have to be really intentional about how you spread this disposition to other people, because the noise that's created by both the inventive and the discouraged dispositions sometimes can overwhelm a really steady kind of pragmatic, muted approach to moving forward. One of the other challenges that we have in the optimistic disposition is that sometimes people can feel like they're going to be accused of being a cheerleader or overly positive. And that really kind of encourages people to hold the energy back right when they need to be leaning into putting that energy out there. So for all of you who are feeling optimistic right now, one of the things I hope you take away from this little coffee break might be some tools for how you amplify that optimism and get it to spread more effectively in your organization, because it is a challenge to do that and to cut through some of the noise that's out there right now. So that's just a quick overview of the model. And when we put it all together, you can see that the optimist and the skeptic really share that pragmatic nature. But the difference between them is being a little bit more risk adverse versus a little bit more forward focused. And the inventive and the discouraged share an almost boundless nature around whichever direction they're going. The inventive tend to spiral up and out into what could be, and the discouraged disposition tends to spiral down into, this isn't going to work, we don't know how to get out of it. So, but there's a little bit more of a boundless energy there, which makes it honestly a little bit more spreadable in most organizations. In the forward focus and risk adverse, you see that spread with the optimistic and the inventive really being more in that forward focused space, the skeptical and the discouraged being more in the risk adverse. Again, with models like this, with these dispositions, nobody's purely in any one of these quadrants, and most of us rotate through them routinely. What we ask people to do is to be aware of where they are at any given point so they can be really intentional about the energy that they bring into their organizations. You may also have a natural disposition where you kind of go, and that's kind of where you live, and that's awesome to understand and to recognize and to be able to take advantage of the power that it introduces. The reason that we think that this is really interesting right now is because when there's a time of challenge in a business, these dispositions show up in different ways. And if your goal as a business is to flatten the curve and to try and not go as deep as you might go otherwise in times of challenge, then it's important to understand how leadership energy influences that. So when a shock first happens in an organization, it's really easy for both those inventive and discouraged dispositions to head off in different directions and inject a lot of activity into the organization, both in positive and negative ways. And that can lead sometimes to some big mistakes because there's a rapid fire overcorrection or overreaction to whatever the situation is. What happens after that often is that the skeptic energy or the skeptic disposition kind of takes hold, and you start to regroup and you start to get into that risk control and mitigation mode where you're just, you know, closing ranks a little bit and saying, how do we get this situation under control? How do we move forward as effectively as possible? One of the challenges that that very powerful disposition can introduce sometimes are delays, because you can wait a little bit too long to start to think about how do we regroup and how do we accelerate out of this, because you're trying to control risk so heavily. So a good thing for someone in the who's a natural skeptic to think about is, when's the time to shift more into that forward focus? We believe that the optimistic disposition is an incredibly powerful position for leaders to take as you work to regroup and to accelerate out of a challenge or any other kind of environment that you might be trying to move from or pivot from. The challenge to that is that it takes a critical mass of people to move into that optimistic energy and that optimistic disposition to really accelerate an organization out of a challenge. And that is hard to do because the optimistic disposition is not as spreadable as some of the other ones. And there's some very concrete reasons for that. In this coffee break, we aren't going to go into those in detail, but what I would like to do is share with you just a couple of ways that we see the delta between how things spread quickly and how they don't spread quite as quickly. And in service to that, I'm going to ask my colleague Kate to come onto the video. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a minute, and I'm going to ask her to walk us through these different dispositions. And as she does this, I'm going to ask you to do a self-scan for yourself as we watch her kind of think about what is the impact that her demonstrating these different dispositions, what impact does it have on you? And I'm going to ask you to share that in the chat. I'm going to stop my screen share right now. Let me just do that. And it's going to bring Kate forward. And Kate, I'm going to ask you to demonstrate each of these dispositions in order. We'll start with inventive. And again, for the folks on the phone, if you can just open your chat, and as you watch just in a microsecond, Kate demonstrate this, if you have any kind of reaction, either it makes you smile a little or it makes you kind of perk up or lean in, think about what your physical reactions are and pop them into the chat. So Kate, let's take a look at what it looks like to feel inventive.
Inventive. Oh my gosh, I've got a great idea. It will fix everything.
Yeah.
Smiling, excited, kind of a pause.
Yeah.
Laughing, excited, intrigued.
Yeah. And that's just in a microsecond. Like, and so it happens so quickly, a little over the top. Yep. Inventive people in the inventive disposition, sometimes other people in the organization can be looking at you and thinking that's a little over the top. Not so sure about that. So we get all of those things. All right, Kate, let's take a look at discouraged.
Discouraged. Oh, no, there's no way out. Sad, annoyed, not engaged, exhausted, depletes energy, irritated. Yes.
Come on, I love that.
To help. Formed, energy suck, downer, waste of time, energy.
Yeah. So I've seen Kate demonstrate these many times, and every time I see the discouraged one, I actually slump a little. Like, it actually, like, I have that impact, that has that impact on me, even though I know that she's, you know, intentionally emoting, and I've seen it several times. So it has a really direct impact. All right, Kate, let's take a look at skeptical. What does skeptical look like?
Skeptical. I don't know. Show me the data.
And let's hear what that does for you. Yep, eye roll.
Irritated, flippant.
An accountant. Accountants are skeptical by nature, and that's perfect. We want that in our accountants.
Frustrated, annoyed. Yes,
yeah.
Spreadsheets.
Yep, yep. Tired, yeah, yeah. Challenged, I love that. Cool, so let's take a look at optimistic, Kate.
Optimistic. Okay, yes, we got this.
Any reactions? Excited, energetic, sunshine and hills.
Routine, encouraging, hopeful.
Yep.
Relatable, positive, ready for this.
Yeah.
Confident.
Believe in the team. I love that. Offer my support. Yeah, so all of these just in, again, a microsecond, and I know in this coffee break we're moving through, you know, these things, these exercises fairly quickly. In our longer workshop, we take a deeper dive, but I just want you to really feel when people are kind of in that inventive or discouraged space, there's a lot that happens that we communicate non-verbally. And even over video, it happens very fast. We tend to like reflect that and internalize that as receivers very quickly. And the skeptic and the optimist are just a fraction less in that space. And there's some reasons for that. I'm going to go back to sharing my screen real quick. So give me just a second to do that. There we go. So we know that emotions spread in really primal ways. And again, we're not going to unpack this in detail, but it's good to know is that we very instinctively as human beings will mimic and match the behaviors that we see other people do. And you might have noticed that with Kate, that even in just a very quick microsecond, when she leaned in around the inventive space, you might have leaned in as well. When she slumped a little for discouraged, you might have slumped as well. And actually what that does is it triggers chemicals in our brain and in our gut, and it changes how we are feeling in that moment. It changes the energy that we're putting out in that moment. And that's part of why things like anxiety and discouragement are really, really spreadable. And it's also part of why optimism isn't quite as spreadable, because that pragmatic side of the dimension, that pragmatic nature of the optimist can stop you from really putting as much energy out there as you might need to in order, again, to cut through the noise of some of the stronger signals that are happening for your people. And also, by the way, that are being directed at you. Because when you encounter some of the stronger dispositions, you're going to react to that as well. So it's really great to be able to be intentional, both about what you put out there and how you're responding to things that might be coming at you right now. We're also, as human beings, really highly attuned to threat. And so when people are feeling anxious or feeling fear, ears prick up all around them to say, is that really a threat to me as well? And we share that. It's not quite, we're not quite as human beings as attuned to things like joy and happiness. So we talk about infectious laughter. Laughter is actually incredibly infectious because it's very emotive. There's a lot of tonality to it. There's a lot of things that we put out in and non-verbally around it that help it to spread quickly. But that takes, laughter is almost explosive. It takes almost an explosion of positivity to make it really, really spreadable. Where with discouragement, that disposition spreads like wildfire if you're not attentive to it, if you're not really cautious and careful about it. So again, we're not going to go into this in much more detail. Just wanted to share with you kind of some of the thinking behind how the different dispositions spread and why you want to be, especially if you're in that optimistic space, really attentive to the energy that you're putting out there and how it can move through the organization. I'm going to give you just a couple of ways to think about how to spread your energy more effectively. And one of the things that we think about for myself, one of it is just self-awareness, kind of doing that self-scan for yourself. I know that for me, my optimistic signal, it's like a whisper. I come in and I'll sit down and I'll look at something that my team is doing and I'll be like, yeah, I think that's a really good idea. And in my mind, I have just showered them with love and encouragement, right? Like I have just put that out there that I think they're doing great work. And I walk out the door and they're like, but I'm actually incredibly optimistic about whatever direction they're taking. And my discouraged signals are like a shout into the world. So if I walk into that same meeting and I look at them and I'm like, I just don't think this is a very good idea. And I walk out the door, even like between that skeptic and discouraged space, they're now incredibly infected by that discouragement kind of vibe that I'm giving off. And as a leader, I have to be really, really attentive to that because that's my own disposition. That's my own nature. And I have to know that when I put out those discouraged signals, they are received like a shout, and then people walk out and they are impacting other people with that same discouragement. I need to really intentionally amp up my optimism. And that doesn't mean being a cheerleader and being like rah, rah. Means making sure that I'm really consistent, that I'm saying things over and over again, that I'm putting that confidence out there, both that pragmatic and that forward focus out there on a really regular basis. I might have to do it more often than I think I do because, again, it doesn't spread as easily or as quickly as that discouraged disposition. when you're in a challenge curve, it is incredibly important to make sure that you're being attentive to that, because as a leader in the organization, you want to get into that, you want to flatten the curve and get into that rebound and accelerate as quickly as possible. So I'm going to give you one tool to think about using for your team. And again, when we do our longer workshops in this space, we go through a broader toolkit, but just one thing that you can take away from this coffee break that might be fun for you and your team to use, and that is visualization. If there is anything that sports has taught us in social science, it's that visualization works. And it might be the most under-leveraged tool for leadership and leaders in today's business environment. Visualization is actually incredibly powerful, especially when it comes to leadership energy and kind of what disposition you're sitting in. So just to take a look, just to hear from everybody else who's out there, what we're going to do is a quick exercise to visualize what are the images that come to mind in these different dispositions and how might they impact you. So for example, in the I'm feeling inventive, for me, an object that represents inventive is a light bulb going off. Kind of the quintessential, almost stereotypical ideation session invitation has a light bulb on it with sparks coming off. So for me, that's a really powerful visualization of what it looks like to feel inventive. What I love for you to do, and by the way, my colleagues are sketching in the background there, some of these images. We're going to fill up this page with different images that come to mind for you. What does it look like to feel inventive? What's an object that comes to mind, or a weather pattern, or a character? I had one guy say one time that what comes to mind for him is Albert Einstein's head, like the classic picture of Albert Einstein with the crazy hair. That's his visualization for feeling inventive. So in the chat, just put in what comes up for you that would represent feeling inventive.
We've got another light bulb, Newton and the apple.
Oh, yeah.
Gears.
Yep, gears turning. I like that.
Open road.
Yep, yep. Actually, I love that image of going towards the horizon as well.
Yeah, a shooting star.
Yep, a shooting star.
Steve.
The annotation tools, by the way, are not awesome to draw with, so my colleagues are doing a great job out there.
A lab.
Yep, a lab.
Wheel. Steve Jobs in a black sweater. I don't know if we can make that happen.
That would be really amazing if you could draw that. So what I would suggest to you is just jot down what for you is a great image for feeling inventive as well. We're going to move kind of quickly through these just so that we get some images locked into each of them. Let's move on to feeling discouraged. What's an image for you that represents feeling discouraged? For me, sometimes it's like a tornado.
Yeah, we've got tearing hair out.
Yep. Yeah, I love that image of like, ugh.
Rain clouds. Eeyore. Yeah.
Oh, Eeyore. Eeyore comes up often in this one. Yeah, he's kind of like, wah, wah.
COVID-19 image. Oh my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we'll all remember the image of that molecule or whatever it is that we keep seeing.
Yeah.
Maybe burned into our brains. Is that a COVID atom coming up there? Yeah, cool. All right, let's move to feeling skeptical. What does it look like to feel skeptical?
Question marks.
Yep, I like that.
Wide eyes. Person with their chin in their hand and a scowl on their face.
Yeah.
Arms, a caution sign. Show me the money.
Oh, I see a rain cloud coming up.
The character Fear from Inside Out movie. Yeah.
Oh, I'm not great with movie references.
Folded
Yeah.
eye roll.
Yeah. I like the eye roll too. All right, let's take a look at what it feels like, or what it looks like to feel optimistic. What does it look like to feel optimistic?
We've got sunny, sunshine, sunrise, a lot of sun. Oh, we got double suns going on here. A rainbow, pot of gold.
Yep, I like the rainbow with the pot of gold. For
Money.
me, my image, by the way, when I'm visualizing feeling optimistic, my image is a horizon over the ocean. And like for me, I can get myself into that optimistic energy and disposition very quickly when I just take a moment and visualize the horizon over water.
Wide open
Cool.
eyes,
Yep.
smiling emojis, dancing on water.
Great. We've got some great images going on here. What I, again, would suggest to you is jot down for you what helps you get into the optimistic disposition or the skeptical disposition. Sometimes you need to be there, especially if you're an accountant, or the inventive disposition. Or how could you recognize that you're in the discouraged disposition and you need to get out of it? By just asking yourself, what's the image that immediately comes to mind when I think this describes where I am right now? It's a great tool that you can use as a leader. I tell you, if it works for professional athletes, it will work for you too. And it's also really great to use with your team. You might try asking them, what's an image that you think represents where you are right now, and see where it might fit in these different dispositions. Try and help them to think about how they can move themselves as well. So it's a fun tool. I would really encourage you to think about using it. There, I'm going to go ahead and move forward. And Kate, we might just want to clear those annotations real quick, but take some notes around that and think about how could you help anchor your own disposition and your own energy so that every time you walk into a meeting, you're where you want to be. So we've talked about just a couple of tools that you can use for yourself. One is the self-scan. Know where your starting point is. We're going to leave the self-assessment up there if you ever want to use that or have your team use it. And as well, you can just do it kind of mentally, a checklist for yourself. Where am I right now? What disposition am I in? And is it the right disposition that I want to be spreading right now? Try cueing optimism for yourself. It absolutely works. Visualization, we know for sure works. And there's a couple of other things, again, in our longer form, we go through these in more detail, but things like setting positive goals, always great to try and build momentum. Momentum matters a lot when you're trying to stay in that optimistic, really pragmatic and forward-focused position, because it just helps you to incrementally move forward. And just remember, optimism is easy to be dismissive of because people will say, oh, you're just too naive. You don't understand the situation. That's not true. Optimists are very pragmatic, but they're also focused on the future. So when you're around other optimistic people, work to amplify them. Work to make sure that that energy that they're putting out there is contagious in your organization. And be really aware of how other people are influencing you. Make sure that you're spending time with optimistic people if you're in that optimistic disposition yourself, so that it can amplify and build. And be aware of the fact that you can also be responding to and reacting to different dispositions that are around you. And then finally, just be really intentional about what you're projecting out there. It's critically important to bring intention into that process. We know that aligned teams deliver faster, better, and more effectively. And one way to align is by being really intentional about the disposition that you bring into the process. And in parting, I would just like to say, I know that you've got this. You absolutely are capable of figuring out where these different dispositions fit for you and what is the one that you want to bring into any given environment, and how do you move through the macroeconomic challenges that we're all grappling with and into that rebound and accelerate cycle if you need to, or if you're in an opportunity and growth cycle, how do you manage that as well as possible? If you're feeling a little skeptical, again, that's a really powerful leadership position to be in, and companies actually thrive with skeptical leaders. So just be aware of the fact that you might want to be in a delay factor, in a delay cycle around how you move into that forward focus. So just check that for yourself as we move through the next few weeks and months. If you're feeling discouraged, own that. Like, we all get there sometimes, but be aware of how very contagious it can be. If you're feeling inventive, that's awesome. I love that energy. Just be aware that you might need to take a breath and make sure that other people are coming with you, and that you're not introducing a frantic energy into the organization. You're introducing a forward focus into the organization. So just check that. And if you're feeling optimistic, that's wonderful. I'm so delighted that you're in that pragmatic and forward focused space. You need to work really hard to spread that to the rest of the organization and to make sure that people stay in that mindset as you go forward. So thank you so much for joining us for this really quick coffee break. We're actually adding another session for next week for Wednesday. So if any of your colleagues or friends you think might benefit from taking a quick coffee break with Karrikins Group and learning a little bit more about these dispositions, we'll be publishing that. We just had quite a few people who weren't able to make it this week and asked us to add another session. So we'll be doing that. And then for a deeper dive into this content, we do a 90-minute intentional optimism workshop where we take a deeper dive into each of these areas, and we'd love to chat with you about that as well. So you can meet us at hello@karrikinsgroup.com. And if you have any other questions or comments, we'll stay on the chat for a little while, but we are right at the half hour. So thank you so much for joining us for this coffee break. We've really enjoyed it. I hope you got some value out of it, and we'll look forward to staying in touch.